Hello everyone, it's Danielle, the Alumni Officer at Young Enterprise, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Dan Silvertown. Dan is a Young Enterprise alumni. He is the co-founder of Talent Ladder, which is a recruitment company in the finance sector. And when COVID hit, he set up Lockdown Haircut with another one of our Young Enterprise alumni. So I'm really excited about this. I'm looking forward to hearing about the story. If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. We will answer them at the end. But I will hand you over to Dan.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Danielle, and welcome everyone, and great to have you on the webinar, and thanks for joining. What I wanted to do with this kind of half an hour session or so before we do the Q&A is tell you a bit about the story of myself and kind of my own background, and then a bit about the story of Lockdown Haircut, which was a kind of small venture business which I ran with actually the co-founder of my current business, Talent Ladder. We ran for about 10 weeks. Right in kind of the heat of lockdown here in the UK. A bit about the kind of success we saw with it, scaling a business from zero and from idea to execution very quickly. Some of the really great press and media and kind of PR attention that we got. Some of the stumbling blocks that we saw along the way. And then actually wrapping it up after those 10 weeks as well. So it was a really accelerated life cycle of a business, and a kind of really interesting learning experience for us in almost seeing a business, go from idea to mass adoption through to closing within the space of 2.5 months. So I'll kind of share that story with you. And then, as Danielle said, we could go to some questions at the end. So a bit about my background. I actually did the Young Enterprise program at school in Aylesbury. My co-founder of Talent Ladder, which is this recruitment business, and of Lockdown Haircut, also did Young Enterprise at school. And we then were both consultants in separate consulting firms, and then we met through a mutual friend and started Talent Ladder, which is an online recruitment platform similar to LinkedIn, but focused very specifically on the finance sector. Now, obviously, as we went into lockdown a few months ago, recruitment for most companies pretty much stopped, and actually most companies were looking at firing people or putting them on furlough rather than hiring. And so pretty much overnight, at the end of March, we saw the work for our business Talent Ladder pretty much dry up. All of the roles that we were hiring for on the platform basically stopped hiring overnight. Candidate applications increased a lot, but if there are no candidates being placed into jobs, the business doesn't make any money. So we basically saw the business kind of come to a standstill, and we had all of this time on our hands, and we were kind of looking for side projects and things that we could do in order to, one, help out with the community kind of more broadly, obviously everyone going through a really tough time, and then secondly, actually just a way for ourselves to stay busy, because as I'm sure any of you know who kind of are working in quite busy jobs, if you go from being busy all day and active to pretty much doing nothing all day, it can actually be quite a tough mental challenge for yourself personally. And so it all started actually when I tried to give myself a haircut and actually got my flatmate to help me do a haircut. We followed a YouTube tutorial, took a pair of razors, hair clippers from Argos, and then he ended up just cutting my hair and taking huge chunks out of my hair. You can kind of see roughly what it looks like, which is not so great there. But I wasn't the only one struggling with this problem, and you will have seen images like this all over social media. Having a lockdown haircut seemed to be a kind of trend or a disastrous thing that everyone was trying and kind of laughing about. But at the same time, there was a large portion of people who didn't want to end up with haircuts like that, that were actually really struggling to get through lockdown because they weren't able to look as professional as they'd like to, and their hair was becoming messy and unkept. So we got our heads together and said, I've just had this awful haircut. Why don't we use some of the technology and some of the knowledge that we have of having a recruitment platform to connect employees and candidates, and apply that to the haircutting or the barbering industry, because there are all these barbers who are out of work temporarily, because obviously barbershops can't open, and there are all these people that we can see on social media who are either disastrously giving themselves haircuts or aren't able to give themselves a haircut and are just letting their hair grow out. So why not use that same platform, kind of technology and understanding that we have from Talent Ladder and apply it to this problem to build some kind of solution. And we can have the barbers give people over Zoom or over Skype a tutorial on how to have their flatmate or partner or someone that lives with them cut their hair to avoid any of these disasters. So that was how Lockdown Haircut was spawned, and we then within 72 hours basically had the idea, told a few friends about it. They thought it was a great idea, and so we set about building the website. And we thought immediately that this wasn't something we wanted to do for profit, because it was we're not barbers and we don't really have the desire to want to kind of move into the barbering space, and we have a business which, although temporarily was slowing down, we did have confidence that would kind of pick back up in due time. So we wanted to do this Lockdown Haircut project for charitable reasons, with the money going to the NHS and also going to the barbers, obviously, who were out of work and not making any money at that time. So we set up the business in a very lean way, and it took us about 72 hours to build. So we set it up on Squarespace. The subscription for that was about £20 a month. We registered lockdownhaircut.com as a domain, which is about £20 for the year. We got G Suite Google email hosting, so we had our own kind of official email address, which was about £6 a month. We allowed customers to come on and to book haircuts into a calendar using a scheduling piece of software for £10 a month, and we took payments online using Stripe, which is a payment processing gateway. They took 0.25% roughly of every transaction, and then all the marketing and the promotion we did ourselves for free. So the big learning for us here was that in a very, very short space of time, in a few days, and with a very small amount of money, we were able to get a very professional looking business up and running, to the extent that it looked as though it had been running for months or even years potentially. And none of these things here we needed any kind of professional help for. We built the website ourselves. Neither of us have particularly strong web development backgrounds. The scheduling piece of software was pre-made and built in. So there's a really, really interesting lesson for us there, that actually it doesn't really take a lot to start a business nowadays. A few £100 and a few days, just full-time work, was actually all we needed. So we built the website, got it up and running, and then decided, okay, now we obviously need to get the word out there and start telling people that this thing exists. And so that followed two strategies. Firstly, we just pushed it out to all of our friends on Instagram. We made a few Instagram stories and then asked all of our friends to repost them. And then the second thing we did was we made a list of all of the journalists who we thought in different publications would want to cover this, and we wrote a short press pack and then just emailed it to them. And alongside the emailing as well, we were also tweeting journalists as well. So we hit them on Twitter and on email. And over the course of about 2 days over the weekend, we just pushed as hard as we can on Instagram and emailed as many journalists as we could get our hands on, basically. Sunday evening, there came a really big breakthrough, and we were published in the Metro online, which is awesome. And to see something go from what was literally an idea a few days before, to then building a website, to then having our own kind of full-blown article on the Metro going live, and people reading and commenting it was awesome. We actually then started trending on the Metro and became the #1 article on the Metro, actually trending even above Captain Tom Moore. So this was around the time when he was raising millions and millions for charity, and actually we were trending above him for a short space of time, but was still pretty cool. And then from there, we decided, okay, now that this is actually becoming a real thing and people are actually reading this online, we actually need some barbers to do these haircuts, because we hadn't got any barbers yet. Neither of us knew any barbers. So the way we'd set it up was that no one could book a haircut for about 3 days. You could go in, you could see the calendar, but you couldn't book a haircut for about 3 days. The first available day was 3 days later from that day, which gave us a bit of time basically to find some barbers to bring on board and actually deliver these haircuts. We ended up being put in touch with a barber called Ben, who runs his own kind of small set of barber chains. He's actually the barber in this photo. He came on, was initially a bit skeptical about the idea because was unsure whether we were trying to do this to kind of take work away from barbers and kind of almost digitize the industry. But when we assured him this was predominant, or this was primary or completely only for raising money for barbers who are currently out of work and the rest of the money going to charity, he got on board with the idea and actually brought a number of his barbers that he worked with on board as well. We then had a really big piece come in, and the BBC reached out and asked us for a live interview on BBC News. And so that's a photo of a live video interview that I did with Ben on BBC News Live on the 1 p.m. news. And then from there, things really just took off. And this was about a week after starting the business. And then from there, you can see just some clips of other press that we were featured in, but we were on Yahoo News, Daily Mail, The Sun, Lad Bible, ITV News, Sky News, Telegraph, pretty much every major UK publication or TV channel or online publication we were featured in, or radio station we were featured in some kind of way. Whether that was an interview or them doing a live haircut in some cases, and actually videoing a kind of a live walkthrough of a haircut and then showing that on the news, which is awesome. So we saw this incredible kind of flood of press that just snowballed, and kind of really, we didn't even have to be emailing journalists anymore. They were reaching out to us saying, hey, we love what you're doing. Can we write a story on it? Then we got nominated by the Telegraph for the best new business in lockdown. They were running these awards for businesses that had been set up in lockdown, and some of our customers nominated us for that. And it was then a vote for the Telegraph readers, and we actually ended up winning that. And so we had this very surreal experience where they asked us to go to a photo shoot. There was still kind of full social distancing, even more so than now, in place. So we had this very weird kind of socially distanced photo shoot in Westminster Park in London, where they sent a photographer along, and kind of me and my co-founder were kind of sat in Westminster Park with like a full-on photography setup as they were taking photos for us winning this prize. And then the following day we were on the front page of the Telegraph, which was pretty funny. And at this point, our friends were seeing us on the news and stuff, and we're like, wow, we thought you'd do online recruiting. We didn't realize you're helping people cut their hair. So that was awesome. And by the end of the press cycle, we'd done 4 live TV interviews, been in 23 newspaper and online publications, done 7 radio interviews, and had been featured in press in 15 countries. And it got to the point in this kind of 3 or 4 week period where the press was at the highest, where we were literally doing 2 or 3 media appearances a day. And we were actually beginning to offload some of them to the barbers as well. And so we were getting, so you can see a video here of Ben doing a live interview with Sky News. So I had this really cool kind of, I guess, explosion of interest in the business. So what does that mean in terms of kind of some of the learnings that we had in going from 0 to all over kind of the mainstream news in a matter of days? There's some learnings that we had really about how journalists work. And so the first one actually is that journalists are often organized by coverage. So if you look at you want to understand the journalists that you're reaching out to, what they cover in terms of what they write about. So we were targeting often either the health and beauty journalists, or the journalists that wrote about lifestyle, or sometimes the journalists that wrote about tech because of the tech angle. And sometimes the kind of mainstream kind of broader things, because that fit in with the kind of whole Corona thing and the barbershop thing, which was big in the news at the moment. So when you reach out to journalists, understand what they write about, and reach out to the ones that write about the topics that you think you have an angle on in terms of what you're doing. The second thing was understand how the press cycle works. So we were quite fortunate in the sense of we started the business because we saw all of this press, and it gave us clarity as to what the problem was, which is the problem we were solving, which meant that we were quite nicely inserted into the press cycle. But the press cycle is basically, what are the press writing about at the moment? And you'll see there are almost these kind of waves and trends of topics that all of the media are picking up and writing about at the moment, and those will kind of last for a while and then they'll kind of die out. So Major Tom was one, and he was being written about for kind of a 2 or 3 week press cycle. And at that point, if you had anything to do with Major Tom, you could probably get a story in a newspaper or some kind of publication. But if you tried to do that now, it would be very, very hard because the press cycle's over. Dominic Cummings was another one when he broke lockdown and drove off to Durham or wherever he went off to. And if at that point you had any kind of story about Dominic Cummings, it would have been very easy to get into the news. But now, again, obviously, it's going to be a lot harder because we're in a different press cycle. So understanding those waves and those trends in the press is really helpful. The other thing which we learned is that journalists have deadlines, and they have to churn out loads and loads of stories per week and per month. And this idea of, journalists in the movies who are kind of investigative and spend months and months researching, like a detective, a story and then writing about it, and then for a big kind of publication at the end of the year or whatever, it doesn't really happen so much anymore. And actually, you just see journalists need to churn out stories in their topic, and so they need you to give them a story as easily as you can, so they can turn it into something for their publication, publish it, and then move on to their next stories. And so our press pack really helped there. And we basically gave them, our press pack was basically a pre-written article that they could almost just republish with photos and videos that they could just grab and put into the website. So we made it really easy for the journalists to meet their deadlines in publishing these stories. You want to try and avoid having to get them on the phone with you. Sometimes they'll offer to and ask you if you can do a phone call with them as an interview, but often they'll just want a kind of story they can copy and paste almost into their publication. And journalists are often working on multiple stories at a time, so just make it super easy for them to lift and republish. This is the same kind of point. Use a press pack to make it easy for journalists to kind of roll into a story, and include pictures and video, because most articles nowadays, whether they're online, in video or picture format, or whether they're in print or whether they're on TV, obviously require some kind of visual imagery or video. And so having those pre-ready that they could just be inserted in means that they don't have to go back to you and ask for them. They're just we just put them in a Google Drive, made the link public, and then just sent it to the journalists in the original email and just let them run with it. The other thing was that we found Twitter was really helpful, because journalists love Twitter and live on Twitter. We would actually just search for lockdown haircut as a phrase, see who was talking about cutting their hair in lockdown. Some journalists were sometimes tweeting about it from their own personal reasons, like, oh, I've just given myself a haircut and it was a disaster. We would then tweet them back and say, hey, look at lockdown haircut. And we would actually get a number of stories out that way as well. We also had a number of learnings from actually running the business and kind of doing the operational side of things as well. The first is that not everyone will love you. So as you can see on the left side of the page here, we got picked up by a magazine, a trade magazine called The Modern Barber, which is a barbershop, a magazine specifically for barbershops and for hairdressers. They published or reposted the article that the Daily Mail wrote about us, and obviously everyone that then saw it, and they asked, what are your thoughts? Everyone that saw it then were barbers and hairdressers, and you can see some of the comments from hairdressers that they thought about what we were doing, saying that we were conmen, that we were twats, that a lot of pretty negative reaction, which was complete opposite to all of the other reaction we were getting from kind of the world more broadly. Everyone saying this is great, you're raising money for charity, it's such a funny idea, you're helping people cut their hair, this is great. I wasn't able to cut my hair before and now I can, and this was just such a polar opposite to that actually we were both kind of taken aback a bit. And a lot of the comments actually were just incorrect, because they were saying they're just doing in, when in fact we were just doing it for charity, totally for charity, not making any money out of it at all. So a lot of the comments were kind of just misinformed, and we initially started thinking we should reply to these and address each one individually. But we thought, actually, on second thoughts, that's just going to start a big debate, and this is not about trying to take on the hairdressing industry. We're here to do a very contained 10 weeks of kind of charity work almost, and then close the business once lockdown ends. We made that very clear in all of our interviews and all of the press pieces, that the intention behind this was to close the business at the end of lockdown, when barbershops reopen, so everyone goes back to barbershops. But we kind of thought of it almost as, when Uber was getting big, there were loads of protests from black cab drivers about how this was kind of undermining their industry and taking away their business. It was almost a kind of, I think, a reaction similar to that. The difference being, obviously, that Uber actually was intending to take over the taxi business, whereas we very much weren't, and we were doing this as a non-profit idea. But that was the kind of parallel that we drew, which we said, not everyone's going to love what we're doing, but we'll just move on. The other thing that was really interesting was that on the homepage, when we went live, obviously, with the website, we didn't have any examples of people having their hair cut and what the results looked like. And what we heard from customers was that a really big barrier to them booking was that they were just very unsure of whether, not whether the money was going to waste, because most people didn't mind donating the money. It was only £15 for a 20-minute Skype haircut or Zoom haircut. So people didn't really mind about the money so much. They more just worried about, would their hair look awful at the end of it? So what we did actually was we asked people to take before and after photos, and then we started putting them on the website to show this is what the before is and this is what the after is. And we actually saw our conversion rate, which we defined as the number of people booking it divided by the total number of people that hit the site. So if 100 people visit the website and one of them books, that's a 1% conversion rate. We actually saw that treble from 0.33%. So 1 in every 300 people who hit the site booking a haircut, we saw that treble to 1%. So 1 in every 100 people hit the site booking a haircut after we put this results bar up, which is really interesting. So it shows you the impact that just 4 pictures have in terms of displaying what you can expect before if you have hair like this, and what you'll look like after, just to show the results. So that was a really interesting, very minor modification, but had the biggest impact in terms of conversion out of everything we did. The other thing was that your customer demographic may surprise you. So if you go on the website, take a look at it after this call, or this webinar if you haven't, lockdownhaircut.com, you'll see that the branding and the imagery on the website is very millennial focused. So we had this hypothesis that the majority of our customers are going to be millennials and people who are kind of tech savvy and so happy to use Zoom to do a haircut, who are kind of a bit more relaxed about it not being the best haircut they've ever had, and maybe live with the flatmates who are going to do the haircut for them, or will live with a partner and will have the haircut do them for them. So we built and designed the website to appeal to those kind of people, and the copy and the text and the imagery and the color scheme all basically appealed to that demographic of customers that we assumed would be coming in. In reality, when we started actually receiving customer bookings, we saw that the majority of them were actually middle-aged couples, funnily enough, who were living together. Often the husband couldn't get a haircut, obviously because the barber was shut, and so it was his wife doing the haircut for him. That was probably 50 to 60% of our bookings were of that demographic, and that really surprised us, because we didn't expect that at all. We thought this would all be kind of millennials, given the kind of novel angle of it. So that was really interesting, and actually that also meant that the sources of our customers, which we began tracking actually as we came through, as we went on with the business. So when people were booking, we'd ask on the booking form, where did you hear about us? Interestingly enough, the best source of bookings for us came from a newsletter that my old university sent around about us to its staff. So we had all this mainstream media in the BBC and Sky and ITV and all of that kind of stuff, and that got some, obviously, a fair amount of traction given how wide it is. But the biggest source of bookings came, UCL does a kind of monthly newsletter about what its alumni are doing and sends that to other alumni and to UCL staff. And so we were featured in that newsletter as here are 2 students, one of whom is, or alumni, one of whom is a UCL alumni. now doing this lockdown haircut initiative for charity. You can book here. And we actually saw, like I said, the most number of bookings come from that. And my hypothesis as to why that is because actually the majority of people on that newsletter are of that demographic here that we didn't expect would book, but ended up actually booking, which is super interesting. The other thing which was a really good learning was that all of these kind of bits of the business around the branding, the marketing, the PR, improving the website for conversion, all of those kind of things, we managed all of those kind of things. But obviously there was a really important part of the business, which was the product, which was the haircut itself. And it was really good that the first barber that we brought on was this guy, Ben, who actually ran his own set of barber salons, which meant that we almost outsourced all of the hair problems to him. So when we started scaling and the business started growing, we needed more barbers to handle bookings. He was able to just go to his network and bring on more barbers, and we didn't need to go then and like screen the barbers for quality or worry about managing them in terms of like expectations or anything. I ran payroll and all of those kind of things, but he managed them in terms of like bringing them on, getting them excited about the idea, making sure that they will like turn up on time for their Zoom bookings and that kind of thing. And a lot of the media requests we had as well often wanted one of the barbers also on the interview. And Ben is great on video and on the phone, so we could always basically bring him to one of the interviews, and he would be a really, really good ambassador for Lockdown Haircut as a business. So having someone who kind of owned almost the product, as it were, and had the industry knowledge, which we had none of, meant that we didn't have to worry about any of that. We handled all of the business side of things. He handled the haircut side of things, and the two worked in really, really nice harmony. The interesting thing being obviously that we never actually met Ben in person, and we actually still haven't. So we ran this business with this guy that we only ever met on Zoom and over the phone. But we went through this kind of crazy 10-week experience together with, but never actually ended up meeting in person, which I think is quite a funny and appropriate metaphor for what kind of has happened in lockdown more broadly. So by the end, we were operating for 10 weeks. We did 253 haircuts. We raised £6,000 for the NHS and for local communities. We had a celebrity F1 driver actually come in through the doors. We also had Scott Mills, the BBC Radio 1 DJ, come in and have a haircut as well. This came through Twitter. He basically tweeted saying, "I'm thinking about cutting my own hair. Has anyone got any recommendations?" Someone who'd seen our website tagged us on Twitter in his posts. We immediately jumped on it and sent him a DM on Twitter saying, "Hey, book a slot here. We'll cut your hair." He wanted a haircut that day, so we had to draft in a kind of last-minute barber to come in and be available because we actually didn't have any bookings open that day because we were all full. We basically just said to the barber, "Who wants to cut Scott Mills' hair?" And someone volunteered, fortunately. So we opened up a booking slot on that day. He then got this haircut, posted us on Instagram, tweeted about us, mentioned us on his radio show, which was awesome. So yeah, we had a really, really kind of funny experience of everyone from celebrities getting their haircuts through to, like I said, kind of middle-aged couples through to millennials that we were expecting to kind of have as our key customers. So really, really cool experience. And our kind of mini claim to fame, as I guess you could say, is that for those 10 weeks, we were the UK's busiest barber, given obviously that no other barbers were operating, and we did over 250 haircuts. So that's quite a cool little achievement for us. Then July the 4th came around. Obviously, all the pubs and barbers opened. We shut the business then at the end of June, put a note up saying, "Look, we're going to close this down. The intention is not to kind of offer an alternative once barbers are open. It was merely to fill the gap in the meantime." And so the bookings kind of trailed off. We then closed it, and everyone obviously now can get their hair cut properly, which is great. But like I said at the beginning, it was quite an interesting 10 weeks because we really went from idea, execution, mass kind of ubiquity in all of the media, kind of steady state running where we were doing kind of 50 haircuts a week, and then kind of obviously died all within the space of 10 weeks. So yeah, a really, really fun experience. So cool. I realize I've just spoken a lot there. So let me pause there and maybe hand over for questions.
That was absolutely super, Dan. Really, really interesting, and just amazing how you spotted that gap and just created this business from scratch.
Thank you.
People have a question, if you want to type it into the chat box. But whilst we're waiting, I've got a couple of questions for you. So one of the things I've noticed with our alumni from Young Enterprise is that we're seeing a lot of them setting up ethically minded businesses. And it was great to see how with yours you were supporting charities around the NHS, which is really, really important time to do so. So how important is ethically led business to you, and why should anyone setting up a business want to get involved with these kind of initiatives?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think it's crucial because if you think about what you're doing with the business, you're basically enacting as much impact and as much change as quickly as you can. And I think charities is a big part of that, but at the same time, charities can't fill the gap entirely because they rely solely on people's own goodwill. And actually, if you look at how the kind of private or the commercial sector, the progress it makes using profit as a motivator, and if you think about just the sheer amount of progress that has been made in certain private sector industries, and you think about what if we'd applied that to the non-profit space and could make the same progress in, you know, solving poverty or hunger or you know, diversity issues in the workplace or whatever it may be, without having that same kind of energy that you can drive through profit-making enterprise and have that kind of in between of kind of non-profit or double bottom lines where you're making profit but also have a social impact. The charitable sector alone can't do it. So I think there's a really big gap to fill if you by kind of using the same energy and the progress which we generate through for-profit businesses and applying that to businesses which have socially beneficial aims.
Oh, great answer, great answer. And also another one is that when we talk about a minimal viable product, I always find, you know, when you're trying to get that ready, it's sometimes having that confidence to push it through the door. And I mean, you pushed through a business in 72 hours. So was there any apprehension, or how did you deal with that?
Yeah, really, really good question. And we kind of went to market, even you could say pre-minimum viable product, because we started accepting bookings before we actually even had barbers that could deliver those haircuts. So you could, in some sense, say that we didn't even really at that point, when we opened, have a minimum viable product. And we then, in those 3 days in between taking our bookings and them actually happening, that's when we had to go and find barbers. I think the thing which was on our side was that we were doing this full time, and so we basically could dedicate that entire 3 days to finding barbers and convincing them to join. I think the main thing was just taking the jump, and the biggest motivator is the pressure to actually need to get something done. So we could have waited and kind of almost been paralyzed by, oh, you know, we need to get the barbers on first, and you know, the barber's going to be like, oh, you haven't got any bookings, and that really slows things down. We understood that if we get bookings in, both of us are going to work our butts off to get barbers onto the platform to deliver those haircuts in the 3 days we have. So it almost creates a deadline for you to get something done, which is actually a very powerful, and it's a very powerful motivating factor to achieve something. So yeah, I'd say the main thing is just have the confidence in yourself that if the deadline and the pressure is there, you will deliver it.
Neat. Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it. So we've got a question from Amma here. Amma says that it sounds like you've got a great team with Ben. How do you find people like this and know they're the right person to work with, especially if you haven't met them?
Yeah, good question. So we met Ben through, or got to know Ben through a friend. So when people started to see this take off on the metro and so on, it gave it credibility, and that allowed us to then go to our friends' networks and say, does anyone know any barbers? And put that, we literally just used Instagram on our personal Instagrams and put on our story, we need some barbers, the bookings coming in, does anyone know any barbers? We ended up then getting put in touch because one of the friends of my co-founder, not Ben, the business partner that I work with, called Jeroen, one of his friends goes to a gym, and this guy Ben has some salons in those gyms, basically. So it was like a connection of a connection of a connection, and she basically said, you should meet this guy, he's really good, he cuts my boyfriend's hair, he's really nice. And she put us in touch with him. We then just had a Zoom call with him and got on really well. And like I said, once we kind of allayed some of his concerns about what we were doing, he was on board with the idea and thought it was a really good idea and said, why not? I'm not working at the moment. He'd actually taken up work as a delivery driver, so he liked cycling, and had basically taken up work as actually a pizza delivery driver, because he was like, I've got so much time on my hands, I like cycling, and I might as well earn a bit of money delivering pizzas rather than just sit at home all day. So he kind of took a chance, and then from there the thing basically spiraled. So relying on your network and relying on recommendations from people, and then Zoom is a very good substitute. The whole business basically revolved around Zoom. We did everything on Zoom, whether it was delivering the haircuts, sometimes talking to journalists and doing interviews, or actually recruiting people to kind of help run the business.
Oh, amazing. I really like actually how you've shown there just how powerful networks are, but how you can make it work even in the situation that we're in where you can't actually physically go out and meet people. So yeah, that's awesome. Question from Kai: did you get any haircut disasters through lockdown haircuts?
Good question. So apparently there was one of the barbers said where it was the daughter of a dad cutting the dad's hair. The daughter, I think, couldn't quite follow the instructions the barber was trying to give, and so then apparently just got really annoyed and deliberately chopped a chunk of hair out of the dad's head and threw the scissors on the floor and then stormed out. This is what the barber told me after. He was like, heads up, this just happened, you might be getting like a refund request from the guys, or like an angry email or something, just to let you know. But that I never saw actually what the photo or video looked like. But yeah, apparently that happened. She just got really frustrated, chopped some of the dad's hair out, and then stormed out the room. I did actually email the customer in the end and just say, I heard this happened. Is everything okay? He was very understanding and said, look, it's obviously, it's on our side. It's nothing to do with the barber that we were with or anything. It's my daughter. Obviously we don't want to refund the monies for charity. And so he was fortunately very understanding about it. But yeah, that's one thing that happened that was quite funny that I heard.
Oh, that's great and amazing actually. Was it 253 cuts, and you've got one that went slightly wrong?
Yeah, it's not a bad ratio actually in the end, is it? Yeah.
I've got a question here from Jenna, who said that the bit about the press was really interesting. And her question's really about the negative press. So did it bring you down when you got that negative press? And if so, how does this make you feel? What do you do about it?
Yeah, so it wasn't actually even just that Facebook thread. There were a couple of others as well. So we got a couple of emails directly from Barbers as well to the email address of the website, saying they were all kind of misinformed, because one of them says something along the lines of, "This is a joke." The word wasn't joke, it was slightly stronger than and more insulting than joke. I've trained for 35 years, and now you think you can just set up a website and take away all my business. And if you understand what we're doing, you'll see that there's no way that actually what these people were saying actually holds true. And so although it initially was a bit frustrating to read more than anything, we knew that this was a very emotional reaction on behalf of Barbers because they felt as though we were taking away their business. It wasn't a rational one, because if you looked at this rationally, you couldn't think that we were taking away Barbers' business, because we were actually giving them business, and made also, like I said, made it very clear that this wasn't something that we intended to run for any kind of period of time. So it was a purely kind of irrational, emotionless response, which we knew, and so kind of disregarded everything that we saw. But yeah, we had a couple of emails come in. We had some comments on our lockdown haircut Instagram page from Barbers saying, this is a joke. Actually, kind of ended up spawning a bit of a comment war between some of our barbers that we had on the platform and other barbers. So that was when we kind of took the policy decision to just not reply to any of the barbers that are giving us any kind of hate mail, because it just kind of got out of control. And the rest of the social media pages were all about like people having good haircuts, and it was either like funny phrases that were haircut puns, or it was before and after photos of customers who had their haircut. And then on one photo there was just this like 30 comment long thread about the ethics of lockdown haircut, which obviously was just not a very good look. So after that, we pretty quickly instated the like policy decision, just no one reply to any of these comments. We'll just message them and just say, hey, if you want to talk about this, let's do it offline, not publicly. There are a couple of comments and DMs on Instagram that I got from barbers directly to my personal Instagram that were, that was like 1% of, or even fewer than less than 1% of 100% of great press and very positive and kind of good comments. So after a while, it's actually pretty easy to just kind of brush it aside and put it down to an emotional and irrational reaction.
Awesome. I love that response as well. Yeah, I think that was really, really great advice. We've got one more question. This is from Amelia. She is talking about the press versus social media. So she says that you spoke a lot about the press coverage that you got. Did you find that social media was as big, or how do you push that and get more exposure through social media?
Good question. It was probably actually in the end relatively evenly split in terms of bookings. So the majority of the press came through Twitter and emails. The bookings then were probably quite evenly split between Instagram, people coming from Instagram because other people were posting, and then they saw it, and then they were going through to our page of booking, and then bookings that came from more broad press that we had, not via Instagram, that then people saw and then booked. So I think you need a mix. You need, there's no one golden bullet in business that this is like your single sales channel and you only have that. At the end of the day, you have a mix, and you have different demographics of customers that come through different mixes. Obviously, the kind of core customers for us, which were the middle-aged couples, weren't coming through Instagram. Generally, they were coming through the broader media and like reading about us in the newspaper or listening to us on the radio or whatever, and then booking. So the millennials that were booking were tending to come through Instagram. So yeah, I'd say in terms of getting the press, Twitter and email, just directed to journalists, were the most effective. In terms of driving bookings, that then came from the press, but also then Instagram. We had a follow-on email whenever you made a booking that said, we would always tell the barbers basically, ask the customer if they're happy to take before and after photos. So at the beginning of every booking, and we also put that in an email reminder, take a before and after photo. Then after the booking, they got a subsequent automatic email saying, if you're happy for us to post your before and after photos on our Instagram, and please do repost them yourself and tag us in them. We then got people who would post them on their like Instagram story, and then all of their followers would see it, think, oh, this is a funny idea, click through to our page and then book from it. So that kind of referral through social media was quite effective in driving bookings, but not broader press, obviously.
Oh, amazing. That sounds fantastic. And I love how you've broken that down into the different demographics. Awesome. Well, that's the questions that we've got. One of the things that we're trying to do with the Alumni Network is connect our alumni. And I know lockdown haircuts are finished now, but if people want to reach out or want to follow you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so probably easiest is on LinkedIn. So I'll just scroll back to maybe the beginning here. So I'm on LinkedIn under Dan Silvertown. So feel free to connect on LinkedIn. The Lockdown Haircut website is still up. If you search for it, the Instagram page is still there. Although, like I said, that's kind of now been mothballed somewhat. But yeah, probably LinkedIn is the best way. If you just put my name, which you can see there, into LinkedIn, we'll be happy to kind of chat offline and offer any other advice which I can.
Oh, super. Well, thank you so much, Dan. That was a fantastic session. I know I've taken a lot from it and got a lot of value from it. I'm sure our alumni will too. So thank you very much.
Cool, no problem. Thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure.